www.TorranceCA.Gov.
Lots happening on the next sports desk, so let's go out to Bonnie Prickett for a preview. Bonnie?
Hi, This Week in Torrance viewers. The playoffs are still happening for the winter sports season. Is your favorite Torrance team still going for the gold? Plus, we get to meet the new head coach at Bishop Montgomery. To see all of this and a whole lot more, check us out on the sports desk. We're on every day at 4 and 9:30. Thanks, and back to you.
Thanks, Bonnie. And finally, March is Women's History Month, and to celebrate, in the coming weeks, we'll bring you profiles of impressive women making history of their own. Reporter Alexa Sita introduces us to Connie Dial, a Torrance resident whose life has been as exciting as a crime novel.
From looking at her, you might not know that Connie Dial used to be a police officer.
He's actually my writing partner.
And not just any police officer, she was one of only 5 women to graduate from the Los Angeles Police Academy in 1973.
At that time, you pretty much had to prove yourself, because you got the extremes. You got a lot of officers, a lot of supervisors who were really helpful. And then you had the other extreme, you had a lot of men who really didn't think women belonged there, so it was difficult.
Amid those difficulties, Dial became one of the first female LAPD officers to work patrol. And after a few years, she was offered a job at the precursor to the Anti-Terrorism Department.
They asked me to go into what they call the Public Disorder Intelligence Division and work undercover. And that's what they call deep cover. You don't have a badge, you don't have an ID, you don't have any contact with the department at all.
Dial worked undercover investigating subversive groups during the anti-war years of the early 1970s. As a means to commiserate, she met John Dial, another deep cover officer, who would soon become her husband. He thrived on the work, but for her, it was too isolating.
I did miss police work, real police work, after a couple of years.
So she got the real police work she wanted, making detective and working narcotics. Dial worked field enforcement, plain-clothed and in an unmarked police car during the rock cocaine epidemic of the 1980s. The narcotics division was huge and the work was dangerous, but her gender often worked in her favor.
And at that time, I was the only woman working field enforcement. Even the criminals weren't used to seeing a lot of women on the street. The good thing about women is, you're smaller, you're not as strong, so you tend to use your brain more than your brawn.
At the time, the crack problem wasn't just restricted to the streets, it was also a problem within the LAPD. And when some officers were accused of using and dealing, Dial was asked to work surveillance for internal affairs.
I didn't really enjoy it, but I felt satisfied doing it because I didn't want those people working on the job.
Eventually, she made Detective 3, the highest rank you can reach, then was promoted to lieutenant and later watch commander in South Central Los Angeles.
I hadn't been a watch commander more than a few months, and the Rodney King trial, ended, and that verdict is what started the riots. And I was a watch commander in Newton when the riots started. So we worked about 30 days straight after they started. People were shooting at police cars, shooting at officers, and my main concern was their safety. It was probably the best time to be a police officer because everything you learned, everything you knew, you had to apply. You really got a good idea of people's character and their ability because you're pretty much on your own.
Her leadership during the riots prompted the department to send her to the FBI for additional training. And again, she was one of just 6 women in a course filled with several hundred men.
Okay, it's been years since I've looked at this.
Dial speaks humbly and matter-of-factly about her life. She would probably scoff at the notion of being labeled a female role model. And while her story may sound like fiction, it's all true. But instead of using her experiences to brag about her life, she uses them to create fiction as an author.
I think the thing that fascinates me the most is power and how people use it and abuse it. And it's probably, especially in the department, it's a really good microcosm of the world where the people in charge aren't always the best people to do that.
Her new book, Internal Affairs, follows an officer investigating a murdered woman's sordid past. Risky alliances are formed and loyalties are shattered, all of which Dial knows well from earlier chapters of her own life.
There's a lot of truth in it. There's some real insights into the LAPD and into the city of LA that you're not going to get in a lot of books. Very few people have had a chance to see, the upper echelons of LAPD and see what goes on there. It sort of magnifies a lot of feelings, I think, that a number of police officers have, where there's a loyalty to the department and to your brother officers, and yet there are some things that you shouldn't condone, but you understand sometimes the difficulty they have and the situations they get into, and you do what's right, but it's not easy to do what's right. But regardless of that, you do it, and I think it's hard to write about that.
The latest draft of a new manuscript will have a female protagonist, something she shied away from before so as not to invite comparisons.
I can see a really good story developing, and it just happens to be a female. So I think I'm hoping this will be the best book that I've written so far.
For City Cable 3, I'm Alexa Sita.
Great story, Alexa. Connie Dial will be making a special appearance at the Katie Geiser Civic Center Library on Wednesday, March 3rd at 7 p.m. Dial will discuss her work and sign copies of her book, Internal Affairs, which will also be available for purchase. You can find out more at ConnieDial.com. And that's going to do it for us at This Week in Torrance. I'm Jen Chun. If you've missed any portion of our show, you can catch us again at 11 a.m. and 6 p.m. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.